On Sunday, December 23rd, I drove to the hospital to visit Ann after church. That was the third visit that I had made to see her in just a few days. But something inside me told me that this visit was going to be different, and it was. When I arrived in a room, there were several family members there, including Bob, of course. And we talked briefly, and then I approached Ann's bedside. She looked beautiful, like she always did, even though she had a breathing tube and a cold cloth on her head to soothe her. She reached up to grab my hand, and she smiled at me through her eyes, and a grin kind of shot across her lips. She never failed to make me feel special when I visited her, like she was always glad to see me. This time, though, I noticed that she looked more tired than she had in the past. As I bent down to talk to her, she told me the good news. She said, "I'm going home tomorrow." I smiled because I was glad for her. I wanted her to be able to go home, so I replied, "That's good." Then Ann pulled me a little closer and said, "But not for long." I knew what she meant. Then she added, "I'm tired. I'm ready to go." The look in her eyes was that of peace. My mind went to the words of the Apostle Paul, who wrote, "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." The definition of faith from Scriptures is Hebrews 11:1. Now faith is being sure of what we hope for and certain of what we do not see. Ann was as sure about the love of Jesus as she was anything in this world, and she was certain of his promises. Jesus said, "Do not let your hearts be troubled. You believe in God, believe also in me." Ann's heart wasn't troubled because she did believe in God and Jesus, her Savior. She knew Jesus had prepared a place for her, and her time to go to him, to be with him in that place was coming soon. And she confirmed it. She was ready to go and be with Jesus. Ann told her husband, Bob, of 63 years, that she was tired of gasping for breath. She was ready to see Jesus face to face. Ann hated to leave Bob alone, but she would be able to see her mother and her dad, Tina and Betty, her two sisters, as well as Bob's siblings, Mary, Edsel, and AC, and many other people. Ann also told Bob she was looking forward to being able to breathe, being able to sing, dance, and do many other things when she got to heaven. And she was right. Heaven was going to bring the healing that she desperately needed. As I looked into Ann's eyes that Sunday afternoon, I saw the conviction. This sweet woman I've had the privilege of knowing for 10 years was sure of her faith, and she knew Jesus' words were true when he said, "I am the resurrection and the life. The one who believes in me will live even though they die, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die." Ann's earthly time was about to end, but her life with Christ was about to begin, and she was ready. And so my response to her was pretty simple. I said, "Focus on Jesus and on your family. That's all you have to do." She grinned and nodded. I kissed her forehead like I always did. And I said, "I love you." And she replied, "I love you too." I knew time was drawing near for Ann to cross from this world into the arms of her Savior. I had no idea when that was going to happen. Only the Lord knew for sure. But I knew because of Ann's conviction it wasn't going to be long. As it turned out, on Thursday, December 27th, at about 4:05, it was time. With her family by her bedside and her husband holding her hand. To quote Ronald Reagan, Ann slipped the surly bonds of earth to touch the face of God. In the blink of an eye, in the breath of an instant, all the things Ann looked forward to because of her faith came true. She was home. When Ann was little, her home was Atlanta. She grew up Ann Pruitt, was born on December 19th, 1931, and had two sisters. She was the middle daughter of three girls, and if you hear her family talk, they'll tell you she was competitive, which they have already told you. She was a little mischievous as a girl, but those weren't the qualities that Bob saw in her first. No, when Bob started to work at Fireman's Fund in Atlanta, and Ann walked through the door after a vacation, all he could see was how beautiful she was. Ann was just 17. She had a dark tan. She had coal black hair, but she had put peroxide in her hair and put a white streak right down through the middle. Bob's legs became like jelly. His exact words were, when he spotted Ann, she was the prettiest girl I've ever seen in my whole life. Even though their desks weren't close together, Bob did his best to get around Ann as much as possible. Company softball games and lunches in Hurt Park with some of the other employees gave them a good reason to get together and become friends. Bob's interest in Ann was growing, and through those opportunities of talking with her, so he finally got up the nerve to ask her out on a date. He invited her to go with him and some other friends with hopes that they would have a good time kind of going together as a group. But they kind of got started off on the wrong foot. Bob said their friends decided to go to a honky-tonk, and Ann wasn't very impressed. Years ago, I can remember her telling me the same story, and she didn't call it a honky-tonk. She called it a juke joint. And she said, "I thought I'll never do this again." Bob probably had trouble convincing Ann that that was the first time he'd ever been to one of those places, too. So he decided to try a second date, and they went to a drive-in movie. But he said, "I sat on this side of the car, and she sat way on the other side of the car, and it was like I was going to the movie with Jack Miles, my best friend." But Bob knew things weren't going well to start, but that didn't really stop him. He was starting to fall for Ann, and he couldn't help it. He said he thought of her all the time. That first date was in June of 1949, and the next 3 months were filled with dates and talking and a love that was beginning to grow. Bob was falling in love. The only thing he didn't know was whether or not she was falling in love with him. He'll tell you that one time during that time he was trying to clear his mind a little bit, so he decided to go to see a movie by himself. And he told his sister, I think, he said, "If Ann calls, tell her I'm not here." And he went to that movie thinking it was going to help him get her off his mind. But he'll tell you the only thing he could see through that entire movie was Ann's face. He said, "I know the Lord picked her out for me. I had never had a vision before that." And he couldn't sleep that night. At about 3 a.m., he decided if he made it through the night, he said he was going to ask Ann to marry him. So the next day, he went to work, and he went over to Ann's desk. She asked him if something was wrong, and he said no, but he had something he wanted to ask her. And he asked him to marry her, or marry him, and then he returned to his desk to work. He told her she didn't have to answer him right then. A little while later, he got up and looked through the glass window that separated their two desks, and she looked at him. She nodded yes. Bob said, "That's not a very romantic marriage proposal, but it's kind of sweet, I think, if you ask me. It's just one step above, writing a note to her and say, 'Will you marry me?' Check box, yes, no." Bob and Ann dated just 3 more months before they got engaged in September of 49. On November 4th, just 6 weeks later, they were married. And Bob was concerned when they first got married because he didn't make very much money. He made $115 a month. And he had to give 15% of that to an employment agency who helped him get the job. Because Ann had worked at Fireman's Fund a little bit longer, she made a little bit more. She made $125 per month. But he said early on, those days in the beginning were kind of slim. Said one time they ate rice for 2 weeks just trying to make it until the next payday. Their marriage may have started off with not much more than love, but soon it would grow. Kevin was born in June of 1954. Sorry for my nose. I apologize. Three years later, Carrie came along. Then Carol. I won't tell you what year she was born. Those 3 children each got married and had children of their own. Kevin married Terry. They had Andy and Joey. Carrie married Cindy, and their children are Collins and Kennedy. Carol married Rusty, and they gave Bob and Ann 2 more grandchildren. Cooper and Casey. In the time, the two great-grandchildren were born. Casey and her husband Zach brought Allie into the world, and Joey and his wife Bailey gave Bob and Ann Brooks. So even though Bob and Ann had a few years of just the two of them, their family soon began to grow. And their love grew exponentially because of the family that was so important to them, as Kevin said. Excuse me, just